Okay, we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is our study session to discuss Goal 3, Growth for Every Student, Elimination of Outcome and Opportunity Gaps for 2023. And if you'll recall, this is part of our monitoring report series for our superintendent. So I will turn it over to our superintendent, Holly.
Thank you, President McGordy. I would like to thank, of course, Melissa Riley. She has been charged with facilitating the compiling of this information for this presentation. So serving in our assistant superintendent role is critically important, but also being able to provide this type of information to the board and the public is on an annual basis is critically important also. I would just like to remind the board that this is the second goal presentation we've done, and this is, of course, year one of the new refreshed district strategic plan, with last year being year zero. And so we are using last year's data as baseline data. We do have new measures in some cases and new metrics that we're looking at. And what we've tried to do is make sure any new metric is a metric that we present is something that we can carry on for the next 5 years. And there are some places where we anticipate identifying new metrics for these measures and would add that over time. So understanding, again, today presentation may have some limitations to what you might have seen in the past, because some of those measures and the metrics are no longer continuing because of the refreshed nature. However, at the same time, there are some metrics that continue. And so you do have a supplemental document that will give you prior strategic plan data points that may align with some of the metrics that are, continue forward with the new refreshed strategic plan. So we're in that transition year, and just kind of want to remind us of that. So I'm looking forward to lots of conversations, and so I'm going to ask Melissa to go ahead and begin the work.
Thank you again, Melissa Riley, Assistant Superintendent of the North Region, here with my esteemed colleagues. I'm happy to be here tonight to meet with you. We want to dive right in. At our first board study session of the year, Interim Superintendent Michael Tully reminded us that this strategic plan is refreshed, and did so again this evening. We know that these while the plan itself, the goals are refreshed, that there's been some adjustment to the measures and the metrics, but it will provide us a common guide for how we move forward with our work and make progress for students on each of our goals. I'll have to apologize for my scratchy voice, which is not very convenient, but possibly tied to a very exciting win yesterday. So, I want to highlight here more vividly our measures. 3 of the 5 measures you see are recurring from prior years. However, the first bullet reflects the equity, our equity measure for this goal, which is new, and also increased percentages of students achieving mastery in their classes is also a new measure. So before we begin unpacking them, I'd like to frame a little bit of our time. In the past, the purpose of the school board study session has been to update the school board on measures in Goal 3 in the North Shore Strategic Plan. However, as we think about starting the new strategic plan refresh with the baseline, it offers, we believe, numerous opportunities to consider what could be. In the article, Humanizing School and District Leadership Through Student Experience by Stephanie Foreman, 2021, she describes how humanizing data attends to students' experiences and can prompt significant change by providing staff with insights on student strengths, areas for improvement, interests, life experiences, perspectives, and personal assets. This type of data can prompt shifts in more humanizing teaching and learning experiences that really honor and draw from students' realities, their histories and experiences, to create high-quality, equitable learning opportunities, which we are focused on here today, as well as focused on liberatory educational environments and justice-driven schools of the future. Jamila Dugan and Shane Safir, authors of Street Data, A Next Generation Model for Equity, Pedagogy and School Transformation. They speak of the mythology and the distortion of an achievement gap. They speak of how it's rooted in narrow epistemologies or ways of thinking about what it means to know. Achievement gaps, we know, are limiting. That's a baseline from which we're building from. And this is a way in which we know is connected to our why of this particular goal. So while reporting data on student performance, our focus is on the opportunity gaps in our system that impact outcomes. We also know the importance of optimizing student voice in North Shore. So street data is one culturally responsive and sustaining approach that we have been exploring recently as district leaders and in schools. And it's one way that we can engage this evening tonight as we get really curious about what could be in the future. So I wanted to highlight just a few examples of how Saphir and Dugan talk about data. I'll just pause for a moment for this quote. So they outline 3 types of data, which you're familiar with. Satellite data hovers up above the classroom, and it can tell an incomplete but an important story about equity. Satellite data examples you'll see tonight and have seen before, things like standardized test scores, attendance patterns, graduation rates. And each of these types of data have their own shortcomings as well as value. So it can promote decision making, certainly, but oftentimes that's separate from the instructional core, which is where the students are on the ground level, the students and the teacher in the presence of content. Map data you've also seen before, which provides a way to navigate the social, emotional, cultural, and learning trends in schools. Map data examples you've seen are things like running records, classroom-based assessment scores, quizzes. It can also be surveys that are conducted at times. And its shortcomings are at times that separate from the student, it can lack the humanity and the experience. And so, for example, you'll see data for students on their running record that won't necessarily have a sense of what their learning behaviors were like as they were participating in that process, or how their interactions were with their teachers. Whereas street data informs how students are performing versus just simply developmental expectations. It can be about how they're feeling in their learning environment, about themselves and others, and what might be impeding their ability to thrive. Street data examples might include things like student work samples, their art student-to-student discussions, performance tasks, teacher design tasks, things like their oral histories, identity maps, what's up on the classroom walls. And it also has a shortcomings, which can sometimes be promote false generosity or savior behaviors rather than being a warm demander, as Zaretta Hammond has identified, where we can still understand the complexities of a student's experience and still maintain high expectations with reciprocal actions for students, staff, and for families. Starting with what equity means. Each means each, and this is our charge. Our North Shore Whole Child MTSS framework is designed to center our focus on the instructional core in order to actively engage each student in rigorous standards-based curriculum, effective instruction, timely and targeted enrichment and intervention, along with proactive social emotional supports. We need to continue to focus on our district-wide implementation of equity-focused and multi-tiered systems of support that continue to shape our schools into what our students need them to be in a way that continues to advance racial and educational justice. As you know, we've been engaging in the implementation of MTSS over several years, recently incorporating OSPI's guidance around the 5 essential components in order to sustain an equity-based MTSS that provides each provide students opportunities to get the support that they need when they need it. So this organizing framework will also help to frame some of our conversations today. So with that.
So the first set of measures we wanted to bring, the first measure we want to bring to you is the equity measure. I wanted to bring that kind of to the forefront. So we're going to kind of talk through some of the ways that the work impacts in the equity lens. In here you can see, and as you'll see throughout this presentation, Superintendent Tolley led us at the beginning of the school year through a large group of us through an activity where we identified metrics that we could use that would help inform the measures. And so in this particular one, you can see that when Assistant Superintendent Riley was preparing it, she kind of numbered them off. And so 3 of the metrics that are really kind of tied to this equity needs piece. So to start with, this is data we've looked at before, looking at students taking algebra. I think one thing I'd like to point out from the very beginning is we situated this within the equity measure. And there's other places we could have looked at it, other goals that we could honestly have looked at it in and can look at the same set of data. But it's important to understand that as we look at this, it's more than just math. How many, this significant number of students completing algebra by successfully completing algebra by the end of grade. It also, there are implications for why that matters. So what advanced coursework do they have access to when they go on to our high schools? So whether it's advanced science courses, algebra tends to be a prerequisite to courses that they take later, like in chemistry, which has an algebra 2 trig component in it. So understanding what that impact is like and why 8th grade then becomes a particularly important point to look at this data. I think the first look at this, and one of the things, and it's not, doesn't say here, but we've got to make sure that we're attuned to, because it's not just about getting students signed up for algebra, that they're successfully completing algebra. So a number to be proud of here as we look at this, there's some numbers where will cause us to wonder, but a number to be proud is the students, when they take algebra, are doing, at least when they take algebra in middle school, are doing really well. And we've identified for this successfully completing, meaning getting a C grade or higher, and you can see the percentages here of the students that when they take it, if they're 6th graders, what percentage of them are getting a C or higher, and all the way up through. And then you can see just over the whole middle school experience. And then over on the other hand, you can see the numbers of students. And in addition, we still have close to 500 students who don't complete algebra by the end of 8th grade, which means they're typically taking algebra in 9th grade for a few students, and maybe even after 9th grade.
I know. It didn't take long, did it? Do we know what our percentage of students that successfully complete algebra that take it at the high school?
I will tell you that this year I've been looking at that, and we've been looking at, so off the top of my head, can I give you a percentage? No, but one of our most failed courses at high school is 9th grade algebra.
Oh.
So as students get there, delaying their algebra experience, is it causational? No, it's corollary.
Right.
There are some other things that lead to that, but that is definitely a question that we're exploring with our high schools as we think about, we're going to have students taking algebra and what might be some ways that we can help provide appropriate interventions.
Well, and I asked the question because the argument is that we're pushing them too fast and it increases the likelihood that they will not be successful. But if they're not successful at high school at a greater rate, then that doesn't help that argument, right?
What we've seen, and again, I stay away from causation,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
but what we've seen, and we've worked with in the past, a group led by Stephen Gehring, so we've affectionately referred to it as Stephen Gehring data. Kids that take algebra in 8th grade, by and large, continue with the math trajectory all the way through high school. Kids that take algebra in 9th grade often drop math at some point. And,
Right.
and that also matters because a CATER requirement, a college admission requirement, is that you take a algebra-based math your senior year of high school. Well, if we have students that are on this, taking algebra in 9th grade, who then aren't taking the 4th year of math, they're not leaving us meeting their CATER requirements, which would be looking at 4 universities. CATER is what the Washington universities look for. There's other ways for kids to get into college, and there may be some other Colleges don't have those same CATO requirements, but it does create some barriers, and there's some correlation to kids doing that. And obviously not feeling successful in math early on can lead you to not wanting to continue math later, so there's some things there.
So I'm recognizing that there's many more slides on this topic. I have two questions, but I'm gonna save one. But my first one is, when we say successfully completing, passing, C grade or higher, these are, our algebra curriculum is tied to Common Core standards, correct?
Yes.
So we haven't loosened any standards, we haven't changed the course, we've just moved it.
Yes, it's still algebra.
It's still algebra,
It's-
as we've always taught it. We haven't softened any rigor when it comes to
Right,
that
from a rigor
class.
perspective, no.
Yeah.
There may be increased, differentiated ways that we're thinking about how we teach algebra and things, but the concepts, learning how to do slope is still slope, or learning how to do some of those things are still.
Wonderful, thank
Yeah.
you.
Let me- Just to make sure I'm reading this correctly.
Oops, sorry.
I'm not. So it says eighth graders not yet in algebra are 498 students.
Yes.
And the grade 8 passing algebra is 510. Does that 510 incorporate those who already passed it in 6 and 7, or is that just eighth grade students who are in it?
It's just 8th grade students that are enrolled in algebra, so we pull their algebra grades, for each grade level, so 8th grade, we pull their algebra grades, what are their algebra grades,
Okay.
as they're taking algebra.
Okay, so we've got basically 50% of our eighth graders, is that right?
Yes,
About 500 who are
right.
not
we
yet
have it.
in, and about 500 who are
Well,
passing it.
yeah, plus the,
600.
plus
No.
the 500 that have already taken it before even hitting the 8th grade.
Okay,
Passing
that's,
it, yeah.
okay, yeah, that's kind of where it was going.
Or 600.
Right, so
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about, we have roughly, year over year, about 1,500 students per grade level.
Mhm,
And so we're
mhm.
like a third.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Show the math. I need a calculator. I was not a math student.
It's about 66.6% that have taken it by the time you're done.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I did jot a note that at the beginning of the last strategic plan cycle, approximately 55% of our eighth graders, or 899, were enrolled, and then this is where we are now.
Is our percentages of participation higher than most? I mean, are we compared to other districts, or is it similar?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It depends on the districts. Some districts, Bellevue being one, and I don't know what their percentages are, took this initiative on many years ago. I think back when Dave was in Bellevue, and he's been here now for 10 or 11 years, where they really concentrated on that. So their numbers, I don't know what their numbers are today, but their numbers have traditionally been much higher than us. There's other districts that have said, no, these are the Common Core state standards, and so we're going to hold our kids. And algebra we see as an advanced course for eighth graders, whereas we've kind of taken the position, and we'll see, I don't know if the data shows up on the later slide, but we have about roughly 70% of our students who are in algebra or higher by eighth grade, so that's no longer really an advanced course, it's kind of the standard course. So it depends on the direction the districts
I see.
have taken. We also want to be thoughtful about who our students are and who our families are, and so that's why it's important to look at how successful. It's not just, well, is algebra, I'm not get myself in trouble here, but algebra, who decided algebra should be in ninth grade, or who decided algebra should be in eighth grade in the world? Like, when was that decision made? And we know other countries approach it differently, and so when we have increased the amount of access we've had to students taking algebra earlier, they've been successful by and large. And we think we have room to continue to grow here.
Thanks.
So, as Assistant Superintendent Riley said, several years ago, we were about 50-ish% of our students successfully completing algebra by the end of eighth grade. And I would just also share, I know Director Hayes, you know this, others may, this idea of students successfully completing algebra in eighth grade predates a strategic plan. When I came into North Shore, which was same as Dave, like 11 years ago, it was in, I don't remember, with board performance measures or something at that time. That was one of the things I was asked about in my interview, actually, by a former superintendent. So this has been work that we've been doing for a long time. Several years ago, we were roughly 40 to 50%. One of the things that we used to, and we continue to do, but we used to do differently, was we would test students on a Saturday. And similar to the stories we're turned around highly capable, we test students on a Saturday, and we would see very few students testing for coming in on a Saturday to test for algebra, and you really needed to know the language of the system to understand why that might be important for you, and so our numbers were lower. So one of the things that we did a few years ago that helped bring up our numbers was we began testing just students right in their classroom, right in their math classes. We were using a particular test, Orleans Hannah. We've since switched away from Orleans Hannah. One is it was pretty outdated. There's some cultural issues in it, and then Orleans and Hannah, the creators of the test, passed away, so they weren't continuing to update the test, so it became antiquated pretty quickly. We were able to find some other measures and did some testing. We actually had brought in an outside research company, Hanover Research, to look at our assessment measures to make sure that we weren't lowering our standards around that. We've had I guess you could say a team kind of look at our algebra readiness scores. We brought in a couple math teachers to sit down with members of the CIA department, so when we get our scores back, to see, are we allowing for students to, are we still holding up our standards? And then there's some students that clearly qualify and then students that are maybe, so then we begin to look at other things like their grades or their testing performance. So we've done that, and that's increased the number of students in algebra. Well, if you look at our data closely, you'll notice we plateaued a little bit over the last couple of years. So we got up to about 75. This year, I think we're about 70. I would attribute some of that dip a little bit to kind of families maybe deciding to do some things differently in terms of math after, if you haven't heard, math has been something that was really difficult to do well during COVID. So that little bit of dip is explainable, but we're still, so I would say we're pretty flatlined around that. And then if you look at this data, there's some clear disproportionalities.
Yes.
And it's situated in the equity goal because the impacts of this are impacting different families differently. So there's some continued work that needs to happen around this. Assistant Superintendent Miller and the CIA department are looking at ways to, we have all of our students take what we currently call 6th grade math, and at the end of 6th grade they get to make a decision, do I go on to 7th grade math or do I go into 7th grade challenge? 7th grade challenge then puts you in algebra automatically by the end of 8th grade. It would appear that there's no barriers. Anybody could sign up for 7th grade challenge or anybody could sign up for 7th grade math. The data doesn't support that there's no barriers. So there's some implicit barriers in there. So I know Assistant Superintendent Miller's been working with CIA to think about how do we change maybe to year 1 in middle school, you take pre-algebra 1, year 2 you take pre-algebra 2, and then year 3 you're in algebra. There's some course sequencing that can be done, some standards work that can be done around compacting what Common Core would say is 6, 7, and 8 math in over 2 years. There are some redundancies that are built into 6th grade math that could be handled in 5th grade, and then as we are sensitive to our elementary staff and knowing that they're implementing new reading curriculum, how do we continue to help them with some of that math instruction? And that begins to, if there is an opportunity for discrepancy, like you start us on track for algebra and you stay on track for algebra, that'll clean up some of the discrepancies here as well. But there are clearly, we can see, I think the most troubling on this particular slide for me is the Hispanic Latinx.
Yeah.
But there are some other troubling numbers there as well.
I just want to make a quick comment. Thanks for calling out the change the system instead of changing the kids' expectations. I mean, we've seen that we've had the structure in place and what we get is consistent. And now you brought up a good point. What can we do to maybe make the course sequence reflect the ends a little bit better, and maybe that can help. So thanks for thinking along those lines.
Thank you. That was going to be my second question, the now what question. So thank you. That was perfect.
And then there are obviously intersecting identities here. A student could be Hispanic or white or African American and be low income, or and be getting special education services and then within this there's some overlapping, right? You can get special education services, be identified as low income, and BEL all at the same time. So numbers aren't completely clean, but what we also see here is consistently too, students in special education, students coming from low-income homes, and students getting EL services disproportionately aren't achieving algebra. And again, why I would point out this is in the equity is there are implications for that. that have nothing to do with algebra. There are implications that have to do with algebra, there are implications for that have go beyond that algebra experience. One of the other things that that Assistant Superintendent Miller's kind of working on too is looking at the algebra materials themselves. And so is there an opportunity to bring in algebra materials? The ones we've had for many years, and so there's ways that they may better support our MTSS system and think about interventions in newer materials. So they're looking at algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 trig, those kind of sequence kind of packages together. So that also might be a way, not to say that the book is everything, but there may be some interventions and resources we can put in the hands of staff that are working with students that may struggle, that would be more supportive than what we currently have in our materials too. So, they've just started that process as well. Yeah, why are they all exactly 9.6?
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a good question.
We can double check the
Yeah,
data.
we'll
but
just have to double check those
I think
numbers. Could be
I recall also being interested in the exact proportion.
Now, when we talk about advanced courses, then, as it relates to math, here's what we would consider advanced in middle school. In sequence, it's not necessarily written in sequential order. On the left-hand side of the slide, vast majority of our students will go geometry, then algebra 2 trig, and then pre-calculus. What we've seen over the years is, as we have opened up access, as highly capable as improved math instruction in their program, we've seen more and more students accessing more advanced courses, geometry, algebra 2 trig, and believe it or not, now we have a small number, but a number of students taking pre-calculus at 8th grade. And when I came into, just contextually, when I came into Leota, we were a 7-9, and I was still, when I first got there, we didn't have enough students in 9th grade taking algebra 2 trig, and we had to send them up to the high school. By the time I left, we were able to add an algebra 2 trig section. Now look, we have 8th graders, and look how many we have. So we've continued to see our kids rise up to those types of challenges.
Can I just point out here where it says less than 10? In the column, it's because there was a number in that column less than 10. If it's across a category, then there are students represented, and I think that's important to acknowledge that we have students in our system who, while the data set doesn't allow us to know what their experience is and where they are learning up in these areas, and so I just wanted to note that.
So we are moving into other advanced course offerings under our equity measure as well, and this one happens to be in our world languages. On the left-hand side in green is data that reflects the number of 8th grade students enrolled in French and Spanish in our middle schools who receive high school credit by passing these courses. On the right-hand side in blue indicates the number of students currently enrolled in Spanish, 100, 200, and 300 as 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who all gain access to high school credit as well. This is exciting data to highlight, predominantly because of the efforts of the staff and the students coming out of Wooden's dual language program, and because we think about what could be as we have our students, our young students now at Sunrise, who are now enrolled in our dual language Mandarin classes, who will be in middle school here pretty soon. And it's exciting to think about in about 5 years for students in this program as well as other approaches, and the benefits that can come from being biliterate entering high school and beyond. So pretty exciting in our dual language programs.
Just a quick question. Obviously, we have Spanish at all of our 4 comprehensive high schools. The only high school that has Chinese is Inglemoor, which is not a feeder school for Sunrise. So we started talking about how that might work.
Have we started talking about it? No.
Maybe I'll just plant that seed. You've got 5 years to figure that out.
Right. And for this, also in the equity measure, we do have many students accessing highly capable programs and services in many different capacities. We do provide service delivery through our elementary advanced program at 11 sites currently. Fernwood, Kokanee, Ruby Bridges, Canyon Creek, Sunrise, Hollywood Hill, Morelands, Lockwood, Kenmore Elementary, Shelton View, and there is one section of third grade students at Wellington. We also provide single qualified services in math through an online service delivery model. Teachers work to provide single qualified readers in their classrooms, and there are some students who qualify for services at the elementary level who do choose to stay in their home schools rather than move to other schools. And they are able to get that through challenges within their classrooms. Otherwise, in middle school, services are delivered through advanced academic program classrooms, and students who qualify for services in math receive services in math and science, and those who qualify in reading receive services in reading and social studies. So these are those numbers.
So what would AAP math look like?
What would AAP math? They really continue on their course trajectory.
So it just,
Yeah. Sometimes students who qualify later, so if you qualify when we do universal screening at 5th grade,
Mhm.
you have a choice to make. You could take summer classes and enter algebra in 6th grade, but if you are a qualifier in 5th grade, you typically right now
Mhm.
enter challenge math 7-8 because you haven't had necessarily that accelerated course, and that would be a really I mean, you wouldn't want to enter. So there are some different places that if you qualify, we suggest to you different options for your math trajectory.
And do we charge for that summer math class?
I think at this point we do.
Amity?
Yes.
And quickly on your previous slide, I think I skipped a beat. The 11 schools that you were talking about, are those the ones that have the high cap in the gen ed?
All
Sections?
schools could have
All
high
schools.
cap in the gen ed.
Okay,
The
okay.
11 schools have our elementary advanced program services, so they would be dual qualifiers in self-contained classrooms.
Okay. And so is this saying, the first 3 lines are within the gen ed classroom? Right, and my quick, limited
Mm-hmm.
addition abilities here tells me that's about half of our high cap students in elementary that are receiving services in gen ed, is that right?
Well,
Those are
so the first line across,
30%.
math only, those are students who qualified for math only services.
Mhm.
So they qualify just in the math area. And so those students, once they hit 4th grade, so those 101 and 130, we offer services to them
Mhm.
through our online services through our single qualifier
Okay.
program.
Okay,
We don't have anything like that for grades 3 or grade 2
okay,
because I pay for that out of the grant and I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
limited
yeah.
grant funding.
okay.
For the reading and math that stay in their home schools, there are 210 across the board who stay there. Those students could go to another school to
Mhm.
receive services. They choose not to. Or they're in NFP or in our online programs.
Right.
And we do have a number of students who plug into and are qualified, dual qualified, and they just aren't in a
Yeah.
traditional school setting. So they are at the Bear Creek campus and they are dual qualified. So this encompasses them as
I
well.
see, okay.
The reading single qualifiers, we do not have any, they get services within their classrooms.
Okay.
Yeah, does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of nuance in there.
There is, yeah. And then the bottom row across, they are all served within elementary advanced program classrooms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
questions, yeah. So in this lots of number there. As we examine those demographic characteristics, we also have made gains in identifying some of our underrepresented populations, and we're very proud of those. We still have gains to make. We have, I think, our students who qualify for twice exceptionality, we absolutely have made gains for our 504, our IEP students. We have not made significant gains in our low income. What I'd like to point out for our multilingual students, or our students who qualify for active EL services, if you notice, and I asked my data analyst to check this out again today, for our columns for 2nd and 3rd grade, you see 46 and 59. They typically, we find them when they're young, and we have implemented some pretty good strategies to identify students as they are young. They also exit early. So we see a lot fewer as they age because they don't qualify for services also. So as they age, we don't have as many who qualify for multilingual services as well. So you will see fewer and fewer active EL students in our highly capable programs. So it will also look like we aren't serving as many multilingual learners as they, because every time we pull data, it is a moment in time. So I just wanted to point that out.
So, we have a lot of data. Oh, is this here? Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of data. A little break from the table. Go ahead, and then we'll return back to the same thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm done.
Go ahead. This is data you've likely seen before.
Yep.
There's percentages in another slide. Okay. And then just for sake of time, we'll hop back to a table. Because the first slide was about secondary testing for advanced placement in IB. You want to highlight this?
Sure.
Yeah.
So about 43% of our Asian students take AP tests, 18% of our Black and African American, 12% Hispanic Latino. So we do have a lot of students. The data is a little bit skewed as we can't account for those who mark no response to the data component of their tests. Our high schools do have pre-AP and pre-IB for 9th graders, which eliminates that option as they enter high school with a lot of unknown variables. We can continue to understand how high schools are exposing their students to AP and IB courses and how they're encouraging them to sign up. We're really proud of the work our high schools have done to try to get our kids involved and interested in these advanced coursework. Some of the barriers for continued consideration may be cost, the test itself, when they're given, as well as the students' possible loss of peer groups or favorite teachers if they choose to take these courses. But we do want to continue to utilize the street data strategies to humanize these experiences and find out what these kids are experiencing as they go through high school and other classes and the decision-making process they make while they're on their course trajectory. And finally, we can explore additional courses that may be interesting and culturally relevant for these students. College Board is completing their African American Studies pilot this year, and College Board provides training for each course, so encouraging high school principals to find teachers to teach this course is our next step, especially as we have teachers piloting ethnic studies now.
It sounds like a great AP course to have.
Yes. Wonderful.
And I'd like to mention that I visited with the Black Student Black Student Union at North Creek High School last week, Wednesday, I believe. And they asked, I had one student in particular after the meeting said he's a sophomore and he would love to take the AP, African American Studies, when it's available. So
We have
he
teachers
was already
interested.
asking for it.
So it's 5:40. And I'm so thankful that you,
Thank
for
you.
your questions. We have 4 more measures, some are a bit longer than others. And so I will just look to you to know, and just know that if we're moving a little bit faster, it's out of
Thank you for the reminder.
consideration for the time.
I think she just told me to move faster.
That's what just happened.
I think it was
That's what I
about
was told.
us.
I think it was us that were slowing things down.
So measure 1, increased equitable access to social emotional supports and services. This is a little bit of a preview. Some of these things are going to come back again next month when we talk about goal 2, I think at the end of the month. So it'll be like a teaser on some of those components. Here are the metrics that are in goal 3. I won't read those to you, but give you an opportunity to look at them quickly.
Okay.
As we start, I'm moving, I'm going.
No, I'm good. I'm good. I just, they're quick readers.
I love this slide for a couple of reasons. Primarily, I think it's a great history in the last 7 years where we've been. Melissa started off talking about the student, the teacher, and the presence of content. Typically, we have seen that as an academic triangle in the work that happens in the classroom. We brought in PBIS about 6 or 7 years ago and started really thinking about it differently in terms of both academic as well as social emotional. And then we continued to build it out over the last few years with the high leverage practices. You'll remember those slides as well. And then most recently, culturally responsive practices. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last 3 years is really building out our social emotional components, both our counselors as well as our mental health specialists in each of our schools. This is just a chart that summarizes basically what that looks like. You'll notice there aren't ratios in elementary school because obviously elementary school is going to have a different number of students. We have 24 counselors in elementary schools and 22 schools. We've got some large schools with multiple counselors as well. On the right-hand side, you'll see our mental health specialists and how we're serving students in that capacity as well. We have capacity for 19 mental health specialists. We have 16 currently that we have. We are working desperately, always, to bring in more. It's a challenge, it really is, and I know that we've talked about that a number of times. Either in study sessions or in other ways. So you know that is something that we're working hard to do. This is the part of the teaser part. We're going to be coming to you at the end of February with some information regarding the Panorama survey. I know that you've been excited about that. That's been a long time coming. We've got some folks that have worked really hard to create the opportunity for the survey as well as to develop the questions. So you've probably already had an opportunity to look at some of the sample questions. We're going to be putting it out for every student 3 through 5, and then also 6 through 12. The beginning first week and a half to 2 weeks in February, we'll have that data and be able to bring that to you and have a more in-depth conversation about what it says specifically, not only about metric 1.2, but also about goal 2 as well. We're excited about that. Lots and lots of people in the system are excited about that. Metric 1.3, just a real quick review of all the things, of some of the things that we have currently in place for this particular metric. As we talked about, PBIS is still alive and well in all of our schools. We have BZ screeners that allows elementary, primarily elementary teachers to identify students in the elementary school. It's a screener for externalizing and internalizing behavior. I think we've probably talked about that as well. Kelso's Choice is in the curriculum for K-2 in every elementary school. 3-5 also has an SEL curriculum as well. We are working on developing a curriculum for our high schools, our middle school and high school as well. Additionally, we have things that aren't listed here, both a crisis response team training, where when schools have crises, we have counselors and a number of trained staff that actually go in. We're working with another group called Prepare to actually train those even more extensively in terms of what do you do in a crisis. In the past, in this capacity, we've also talked about Forefront suicide prevention training that is provided for staff. All of our high schools have participated in that. Some of our high schools have actually requested to do that a second year as well. We'll talk about the next slide a little bit more next time as well. But these are the topics every month. All of our counselors meet together. What I really want to point out is the right-hand side, because I think that this is, I've been working with counselors for the first time this year, as working with the student services. I don't know that I've fully appreciated all of the things that they do, that I've come to appreciate. But on the right-hand side there, and we'll talk about this more next month, you really have the MTSS structure as counselors have lived it since the dawn of counseling, right? And they do it exceptionally well. But that is one component, and we're constantly building on that as well through these training experiences. Okay.
Thank you. So measure 2, a familiar measure. We know that the intent is to monitor and respond to student growth across the standards that serve as a marker for grade level competence. The leading indicators provide guidance for what we measure that's predictive to the growth that we aim to make. When we're able to see accelerated growth, thinking of opportunities and outcomes, the gaps, sorry, let me restate that. When we look to see accelerated growth based on some predetermined benchmarks, it helps us to determine if our core instruction and the interventions that we're applying are being delivered effectively with fidelity, and if our students are learning. The impact of looking at the growth along a continuum, however, just using one measure can mean that we might miss some learning that's taking place in the periphery, and the growth that can't be measured by one single indicator. May it be computerized tests or her pencil paper assessments. And so this is again leaning back into the importance of humanizing data. It's one way that interim superintendent Tully's listening sessions, as well as the shifts that you've made in their school board meetings to meet with students and listen to what they have to say about belonging, is really essential. And we know that when they feel supported, that rigorous and relevant learning can really take shape. We know that belonging after physical safety and having basic needs met is an important precursor to learning and thriving in school and in our society. And so when we look at these metrics here, yes, we have data representations, but there's so much that has been and will continue to go into what takes place in the classroom with our curriculum. I know a month ago you met with our curriculum instruction and assessment department, and they outlined for you the implementation of Into Reading, which is tier 1 for everybody, and that's differentiated tier 1. That's tier 1 that supports every learner in our system, and so we're looking forward to what could be when they begin to refine those their work next year and utilize those assessments in classrooms. So for sake of time, I'm going to pop ahead. Second, and I know you've seen iReady data before. This reflects our overall performance by each grade level, 1 year post-COVID, but it's an opportunity to look at growth trends, and maybe not post-COVID, but it's an opportunity to look at growth trends over time in the future to investigate how the data informs the needs that we have and the universal supports across within grade levels and across grade bands. We also have the ability to drill down the classroom level and look at individual student performance data to assess needs, and then work in collaboration with grade level department teams, specialists, and paraeducators to serve students. This is important data for us to look at too, because we now know that with more certainty that there's a high correlation between our iReady data and our SBA data. So when we're looking at standards mastery, it's helpful to know that, of course, along with other triangulating data practices, that this becomes really important. So as you can see, based on the amount of slides, there was a supplemental packet provided by Curriculum Associates to help explain the correlation with the correlating lines. And so, yes, it's important to think about the fact that our district was involved in the study with surrounding districts, and it was nationally normed. But that our students that are at mid, that are performing on these assessments at the mid-level have a pretty high likelihood of passing the SBA. And so it helps us think about our students who are not yet there and what it means for us in the beginning of the year to have the data to know exactly who to target and to provide additional supports and how. And it's not only an assessment tool, but there's also differentiated supports embedded that are offered. So I'm going to pause for a second because I see flags.
So
yes.
one reflection, again, context is so important, and everyone is doing such a great job bringing that up, but there is a wonderful trend from fall to spring of growth, which is wonderful, pointing out that spring we had a lot of challenges in terms of staffing with the Omicron surge, and so I wanted to point that out. But there's another trend in here too, and I don't expect an answer right now. I guess we go through the slides because it pops up, and it has for a couple years, but the growth between fall and spring tends to slow down as you get further along in middle school. And so, thoughts around that, and what the ideas mentioned about, okay, taking a look at updating some of the algebra and math curriculum, ideas around that because it's kind of persisted over time, it makes you wonder if there's some systematic things in there. And so happy to, again, not something to answer right this very second, but it's an important thing to discuss.
That was essentially my question, and I skipped ahead to math and noticed that there is, while not as much growth at middle school, there's still growth between fall and spring. And so I'm wondering if what happens at middle school, there isn't that targeted reading instruction that is happening the way it is at elementary, and that perhaps maybe we still have kids that need reading instruction. Just saying.
I think another thing, and I don't want to discount, there is a conversation to be had there.
Yeah.
The other thing to notice is the decrease in the N size.
Oh, for sure.
So as we've talked about, is this the right practice or not? But look at that 8th grade, and we have 952 students that took that test. We have roughly 1,500 students in 8th grade, and so students that are in some of our AAP programming don't take it, and those students typically would
Why not?
score higher. With math, there was some, in particular, where the first frustration came out. I know this is reading, but with math, there was some frustration that came out from some of the students, and they met with members of the Curriculum Instruction Assessment Department as well as our principal and stuff. Conversation of, we already know all of this stuff. Why do you keep testing on it? We know it. So trying to think about and be responsive to those students, and then that those students also take reading. So we've gone back and forth. Is that the right decision? Because it doesn't look good in our data, and then is there value to be gained from testing those students? And we've had quite a bit of discussion about that. That being said, that only explains some of the trend, but it's just something to be aware of as you.
And helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, when I met with Derek Goosey, they're definitely encouraged to take it all the way through Algebra 1. So even those 8th grade students, and then starting in geometry and beyond, it's not necessarily required if they're still in middle school. The other, we had some additional conversations, and there's some other correlating data that we potentially could provide, but Curriculum Associates do a lot of work to show the correlation between the online lesson practice and whether how interested students are in participating on that, in that and how many minutes are attributed to that learning. There's some additional data there. The Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Department also has surveyed teachers to get specific information from them each year to continue to improve on this work, as well as students. So they did a student survey last year to ask them particular questions about what they thought was important and what they could improve. And so any of our thinking around what could be could also help inform their work as well. So, yes.
Assistant Superintendent Riley, I just wanted to point out that's a great example where student voice and listening to student voice affects how we look at this data. So I appreciate that you just brought up and explained why the numbers are lower, and it's great rationale. And I do agree that if the students have already passed through these testing things, what is the point? So thank you.
And I would add, just so we're aware, if there's some students out there listening to
Yes.
the iReady assessment portion, so the instruction, there's two portions, assessment and instruction. The assessment portion actually assesses through 10th grade standards. So it actually assesses through Algebra 2 Trig on the math end, and then kind of 10th grade ELA reading standards. So it's an ability to measure beyond just the 8th grade level. So it's, again, we've had some robust discussions because here's what the students are telling us, here's what's our need. And
I had a similar comment, actually. Thank you for bringing up the difference in the numbers and a potential explanation, because I looked at that and I thought, oh my gosh, what's happening in middle school? Because the red bands were growing, the green bands were getting smaller. It'd be interesting at some point to, I don't know if there's a way that you could tease that out, a correlation between who's now still taking the assessment and how that impacts the bands. But thank you for clarifying.
Okay. I promise to shut up. If we go back to the reading metric, yes. So it's not, my concern is not the total percentage. My concern is that we don't see the growth from fall to spring. And if we're taking out the highly capable, all the more we should see a substantial growth from fall to spring, because the theory is the highly capable wouldn't be growing that much because they're already there to begin with. So that's my question, is not why isn't the total number, but why aren't we seeing that level of growth from fall to spring in reading? Because there is growth in fall, or in math, but we're not seeing growth in middle school in reading.
My thought was basically the same, is that we want to be careful that, we do want our students not receiving highly capable students or services to be growing, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So there is other reports we get from iReady that they come and meet with us and share, like, here's your, after our fall testing, here's one of the things that they will meet with us either in winter or spring, I can't remember when they do it, is they will show us students that are 3 grade levels above, how much growth they made, how much the median student made. What's that? I think it's broken down slightly. Maybe it's this way.
Yeah, we
but
have
it's
it.
mid or above, so they break it down that way too, and we can see where there's some bands or some grade levels, like, oh, 3rd grade, look at all the growth made in 3rd grade, but then they didn't in
Right.
6th grade or whatever. So there's
Yeah,
other
this
things.
one was interesting
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what you're
Break
referring
some-
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, that's some of it, yes.
So, was there another question or not?
I think they're all down.
We're good.
Okay, so I think that I want to go back to this slide briefly. Sorry to make you dizzy, because we are particularly thinking about particular groups of students who receive English language development services and special education services. But I think it's okay for us to acknowledge that we need to pay particular attention to and think about how to support. And so in this slide, you can see that there's growth in reading from fall to spring last year for students receiving English language development services from 25% at placing at grade level at the beginning of the year in the fall to 49% in the spring. Leaning into these particular areas of service, I think is important because when we think about the system that we're in, the schooling system that we're in, it hasn't necessarily been uncommon historically for students who receive these services to be pulled out of core instruction. And that is not the path that we are on. We have a lot of support coming with our Into Reading curriculum that provides differentiation for each student within the core. There's also been robust work in the last couple years on the part of the curriculum instruction department, as well as Dr. Butler heading up the AMPS department to find additional resources that particularly target students' needs as we're thinking about House Bill 5030 and reading difficulties and things of that nature. And so I think it's important for us to think about this in terms of the strengths that exist in terms of students' ability to grow, and what this will continue to mean now that core instruction also means that it's not on Zoom. You can be back inside the classroom and everyone learning together, and that our work to direct supports within the classroom is a multi-tiered system of support, right? An integrated service delivery model, the sharing of resources across the board. And so that is why these particular pieces of data I felt would be important to highlight for us to continue to look at over time. And then I will go to the growth goal slide as well when we're ready. Okay. Looking at the time, we're gonna have a lot of. So I'm gonna hop ahead since it's 6 o'clock. So there's a reality here too that we highlight, Director Hayes, that connects to your point as well. So this is a slide where the data maybe has been represented here before, but this is iReady now helps us kind of see more clearly our baseline placement assessment, and then we can correlate it with other groups, so we can go more narrow in our thinking, or more targeted in our intent to serve students in these particular groups. So the baseline placement is on the left. So this is where students tested in the fall. Okay. The student assessed total is the total of students who tested in the fall and spring. So just so that you're aware when you look at these numbers, it just means that there were students who either tested in the fall or the spring, but not both, and so that data isn't factored in. The progress median shows the middle range of our annual growth students demonstrated towards their goal. So for all students K through 8, the median annual growth percentage was 108% for 14,606 students. And I'll know why I don't see that here. And so if you were to, this means that if you were to think about that student right there in the middle, that the approximately 7,303 students made progress 108% above their annual growth goal, and then 7,303 students placed at 108% or below their annual growth goal, which is determined for them based on how they place in the fall. And so the percentage of students by each placement met is an indicator for us of the progress that students are making and areas in which we need to target when we think about acceleration and opportunity. So as I shared before, iReady has done our curriculum associates have done work to norm this data, and acceleration towards placing, so moving from having students move from 3 or more grade levels below to 2 or more grade levels to below to on grade level, or being early on grade level to above grade level, for example. Those are placement moves. This helps us see the percentage of students across the board that are making growth. And in this particular column, this annual stretch growth is an ambitious goal. And so if they are meeting that stretch goal, they are definitely accelerating their growth and, in essence, acquiring more grade level standards, or understanding more and utilizing more prerequisite skills that are impacting their learning. And so this is going to be an important place for us to continue to look. In the national norming, when students fall between 25 to 35% of their annual stretch growth, that is considered a good range for us to be a marker of that acceleration. So I tried to shorten a lot of notes, and I know we can go on to explain a bit more. What's really important to hear, and I'm going to pop ahead just so you can see, particularly for students who are multilingual learners, and for students that receive special education services, is that when we think about multi-tiered systems of support, when we think about all students, each and every student being served in having access to core instruction, and then supporting those students from there. Ideally, we would want to have at least 80% of our students at grade level, so that we can really focus in and target our resources for students who need additional support, and then students who need an intensified level of support. And so our overall for the 2022 overall for the 2022 school year, the end of the 2022 school year, 73% of our students were on grade level in reading. So we are close, but not quite there yet, right? So those are a few numbers that we can keep in mind, whether it's as a district, whether it's by school, by classroom, to think about how we're able to really orchestrate our resources, allocate resources to support students. And when I say resources, I don't just mean monetary resources. I mean also the people we have, the time we have, the structures, how our facilities are used, and all of those factors. Here's math. And in the 2021 board presentation, this data was also shared. The reason why we didn't bring in the progress or the correlation per se is because, as you know, there was some testing, and then we stopped, and then we tested from home, and then, right? So this is really our 2021-22 was really, even though we've had this data access since 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22 was our first actual year-to-year spread with our students here with us. Okay, I'm pausing to see if there's any questions as I try to get us to this next area. Happy to answer more I-Ready questions in the near future. So what's important to point out about the Smarter Balance assessment is that we know that it's a form of satellite data. We continue to view, it continues to give us that bird's eye view of how students are performing towards standards mastery. And remembering our I-Ready correlation, for example, in reading that I just shared, This is again another place for us to continue to look and see how we're doing. Our students who tested in 73% of our students in reading on the iReady were demonstrating mastery at the end of the year, and 69% of our students in math. But again, that iReady data is K-8. And so another thing that I wanted to point out was that the Smarter Balance Assessment has changed since last students took it. And so this as a baseline is important, because in 2018-19, the last time that it was taken, the CAT component of the test was longer. It's been since shortened. There used to be claims that you could analyze more specifically where students might have a particular need or a place to target, or what the system might be working on, and they don't provide that anymore. And then also we don't have access to the growth percentiles that at least numerically you could track a student's progress over time. And so those are just a couple things to keep in mind.
We really liked the growth percentage.
Yeah, and I don't know that it means that they're not coming back according to Derek Tucci. It's just because of the disruptions, we really need to keep those pieces in mind. Here's the ethnic demographic breakdown. I'll just give you a second to look at this. Just an analysis, not that I particularly have an answer, but I found it interesting where that in most areas that this percentage of students demonstrating mastery in science across the board were higher. And so I wanted to highlight that, and I just pondered. I think it's a place to continue to ask, what that could mean, whether it was about a change in a test, or whether it was about a way in which students were able to engage in science learning and exploration. It's hard to say, but it was an interesting correlation that I noted. Okay. Moving on, looking at time, everyone's really excited. Here is the breakdown by programs that serve students. So before we shift to the next part, and I think some of my colleagues have talked about some of these pieces. I just wanted to say that throughout the presentation and in this particular measure, we've referenced multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, in a variety of ways, especially when it comes to addressing the needs of our students who are not yet testing at grade level. So this layered approach is where we believe we need to focus, which is situated within the instructional core. The reason why this image is so important, because instead of a one-dimensional linear triangle, it helps you really see that every student getting what they need when they need it is not instead of, but on top of being included and having access to core instruction, to their peers, regardless of their learning needs and learner variability. And so as we continue to think about our work moving forward, it's essential that we stay steadfast in what's happening here in each and every classroom in our school district, while also keeping in mind that it's also influenced by what's going on outside as well. What's great is that our students come to us from the community, and they have a lot to offer that can be infused into their learning experiences. That makes learning more meaningful for students, and structurally we want to continue to think about the other components of MTSS, like our partnerships with families, having a wealth of data to inform our decision making, to help us think about how we continue to support students within the instructional core, having their needs met. We're also continuing to build coherence as a system and align our initiatives around students' needs. And this coordination is occurring as a result of our district's MTSS implementation team and how that influences, as well as the leadership, how schools, MTSS teams are being supported, their leadership team, their grade level and department PLCs, and the guidance teams. We've provided teaming structures to support the function of the teams, as well as revised our intervention and guidance team process that first was instituted here in North Shore in 2013. And so the teams are definitely working towards having these teams be more effective in their work and their focus on student learning. We've talked about the curriculum and the Into Reading curriculum and how that's supporting our work, but we haven't talked about the fact that we have instructional matrices that are being developed for K-5, or that have been developed and we have in draft form that we'll be sharing out with schools very soon, that coordinate our resources in one place. So when you are able to map out the resources available within the system and then locate them in a centralized place that's common to everybody, the more effective you are then able to think about which of those resources match to students' needs, the more targeted, intensive your interventions and personalized your supports can be for students, because it's not, let's say, just about what the student is doing in reading and just about their classroom teacher or the reading teacher. It's everyone working in concert to support students, and so having those pieces foundational is going to be essential. I also have more I could say here about the different things that we're doing, and if there's time, I can go into that, but I do want to move on and highlight a few additional pieces. And I'm going to try to move quickly here. This is the new metric, and the new measure, excuse me, and these are the metrics that have been identified to help provide insights into whether or not we are achieving the goal achieving this goal. In the past, we've looked at a lot of secondary data. This provides an opportunity to think about what's happening for our elementary students as well. So here's the 2018-19 report card. The reason why this is important is because this is the report card that teachers are likely using right now to score students, and it's been we haven't been able to score in each of these areas the last few years, and so this like the grade level data that you will see and have seen from secondary, we believe will give us some insights into what teachers are assessing, especially as we continue to use a variety of measures to as an indicator of our students in primary grade levels achieving mastery. I wanted to show this because the report card data that we're going to look at is based on last year, and last year teachers were only expected to score in the main core components while they taught a variety of standards across the board. It was one way to support them as we navigated the pandemic. And so what I think is interesting about that opportunity is that we're able to see for grades 3 through 5 who are asked to score these areas, the total of students that were scored at grade level or higher in semester 1 and in semester 2. And then it also reflects the total possible marks for that area. Pause. I think it also helps to think about the total possible marks and how that's representative of the students right across our system in 3rd through 5th who would have received those marks and where we can go from here. And I think it provides an opportunity for us to think about common assessments, about how we're collaborating across teams and building collective efficacy, not only in our instructional practices, but in how we're working together to provide students with what they need when they need it. And so when you look at the breakdown by program and by racial and ethnic demographics, this provides some insights for us as well as room to grow.
So really quickly, Assistant Superintendent Riley, can you help me to just understand the charts? The previous slide showed,
This one?
yeah, that one right there, showed the percentages of 3 and 4 ranging from 69.9 right up to 93.8 for the first semester. But then when you go to the next slide, none of them come close to that. And so I was having a hard time understanding the difference in the data sets.
Yeah, so the first time out of the gate, this is the way that if you look at reading, right, approximately 6,000 marks for 3s and 4s, and then approximately 6,500 marks, approximately 12,500 students marks out of a possible 15,772. So that's by content area.
Okay.
And so now if we go based on student demographic, we're looking at
All the content.
all
areas.
the marks per individual racial and demographic group.
Okay. So out of the several contents, the 6 content areas, just to go off the first line, of the Asian students in first semester, of the grades they received, 43 and a bit % of those grades were 3s and 4s. So we're not talking about numbers of students, we're talking about numbers of grades.
Numbers of marks
Of
for
marks, okay.
for students that identify
Okay. That
in
helps.
synergy in that.
Yeah,
in that
so it seems to
group.
me only
Yes.
43% of Asian students were passing. But it's just an accumulation of all the marks they were receiving. Okay.
Yes, yes,
Than't you.
yes.
All content areas.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes. And again, something new to look at. But we also had lots of really good conversations about then how does that bridge, what does that look like when the bridge that walks us across from the land of 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s to the lands of A, B, Cs,
Right.
right? And so then now we look here at total possible marks, right? And while it's grade level marks, which we've placed, I believe, a heavy emphasis on, while the standards-based grading is based on the standards, we had the opportunity here, I believe, to continue to think about what that work looks like for our staff, but also the transition and experience for students and their families who have one way that they're evaluated across the board and maybe often one concrete thing that comes home, right, that they see that then shifts from 1, 2s, 3s, and 4s, pluses, minuses to I definitely saw it as an opportunity to keep in mind another way to look at the data in our elementary grades and how that can also inform our work, especially because some of our initiatives are really launching in elementary as well when we think about our new reading curriculum and such. This is just a visual of it of the marks C or higher we felt might be informative and continue to look at. And then you may have seen this before as well in the Goal 5 presentation. What's important to note here for achieving mastery is that this is representative. The students who are receiving a 3 or higher are getting college level credit. And so it definitely is an indicator of mastery, especially when we think about the fact that students at not just 12th grade students are the ones that are taking these tests. Yes?
Might be interesting to look to see how many of our students that take the AP or IB tests that are students that are the farthest away from educational justice are actually receiving college credit for these programs.
I wonder how we would measure that.
I don't know. That's what
But in other words, the folks that might need it the most.
right. Is this actually benefiting them?
Right.
That's where they go to school too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Right.
all part of the game that we play when we know how to play the game, right? Of making sure that your kid took the test and got credit for them. It's from a household as farthest doesn't know how to play the game
That
and
might
not benefiting from it.
be a question for our friends at Cascadia.
Okay. So while that was quick, that leads us to our last area. And I know we're tight on time, but
How much time do we have?
how much time do we have?
Well, we're at time actually, but if the board would indulge us another 10 minutes or so.
So measure 4, reduction of the disproportionalities in discipline, suspension, and expulsion rate across student groups. There are 2 measures that you will note, 4.1 and 4.2. Discipline, suspension, and expulsion rate by student group, as well as isolation and restraint data by student group. So the first slide is from 4.1. And again, this is from 21-22. You'll remember we came out of a pandemic. 2021 was obviously one of the only things that went well that year was discipline rates. Yes. So this is a reset, as it were. You'll also remember that the 1920 was also the beginning of new policies, right, in terms of the WACs and RCWs. We had a training in August of that year, August of 2019, and then had half a year, and then we left for a little bit, and then we came back in 2021. So this is in essence a fresh start of sorts, but there's still lots of work to do. This slide does a couple of things simultaneously, right? Showing both the percentages as well as pointing out the disproportionality. From previous years before the pandemic, our Black and African numbers of suspensions have been down. Our 2 or more are about the same. Our Hispanic students, that's actually an increase from previous years. So it is work that we've been working on this year. Actually, in October of this year, I had an opportunity to meet with, it was an expanded cabinet. So in addition to the 15 cabinet members that we have, we had probably a number 50, maybe 20 additional directors, principals, assistant principals, administrators from across the district to actually take a look at the data. I actually pulled it up from 2010 all the way up to actually September of that year. And we had a conversation about the data, but also at the very end I asked a question. that is going to really guide our work and has so far this year. And the question that I asked them was, do North Shore systems, structures, and practices lead to disproportional discipline outcomes for our students? How do we create, educate, train for, and ensure our policies and systems are just and our administration of them is consistent, effective, unbiased, and fair? So we actually, after looking at the data and that question, we had a lengthy conversation. We took that information to the RAS. RAS have certainly been working with their folks as well. One of the first questions was actually number 3, was when's the last time we've been trained? And so on January 30th, we're actually going to have a training for all administrators. It'll be 3 hours, 9 to 12, where we're going to take a look at our policies and procedures, but most importantly, our practices, right? Because certainly policies and procedures are important, but how we bring those off the page is going to be a significant part of the experience that students have. Discipline's inevitable. Students make mistakes, there's consequences. But the result of that needs to be productive, instructive, informative, fair, and also an experience where they learn from, right, and come back in whatever form, having learned something, right? And we as a system having learned something from that experience as well.
Just out of curiosity, how long had it been since the training occurred?
How
long had it been since people were trained?
we had it in August of 2019, and then we had half a year, and then we went on
that was-
pandemic.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
Got it.
in years, not so long. In pandemic years, it feels like it was forever. So that's really the work that's been in front of us all year. Part of the training will, of course, be around policies, practices, and procedures, but it'll also be a real deep dive into the data itself. Right? Where are we? Where do we need to be? And this is going to be a pretty important aspect of that. The next component is as well. Of course, this is the categorical program makeup of suspensions and expulsions, and as you can see, disproportionate there as well. There's much work to be done, but I believe we're in a good position to do it.
Can you help me understand end size? So how many suspensions and expulsions are we talking about in total?
That I don't know.
I could pull it.
We'll have that
Okay.
data for you on
Pull it up,
Friday.
Because if you're
Yeah.
talking a couple dozen versus several thousand, you know, the gaps have
So-
a huge impact.
Absolutely. We'll get that for you
Thank you.
Yeah.
for Friday.
That's a great question.
And if I could, do you have a comparable rough estimate of where we are now versus 2019 for these categories?
I don't, but you'll have that on Friday as well.
And again, in size, so total number, I mean, if the gaps are there, but overall, the numbers have come down, that's helpful to know.
Excuse me.
And this is a similar chart. It's just, as you've seen before, we've got both the graphs as well as the numbers to look at as well.
This is it right here,
Oh,
yeah.
there it is.
Oh, 4-1, page 59.
Discipline incidents.
This is incidents.
Yes,
Right.
not
This is
suspensions,
This is
Yes.
not
not-
suspensions.
Yeah.
This is the,
It's the walks to the office.
yes,
Yeah, just the walks to the office.
phone call to parents. So,
And then the last slide, 4.2, is specifically about isolation restraint data by student group. So if you look on the right-hand side, it's the number of students. And again, this is from the 21-22 school year. And then by group as well, because that's part of the metric. In regards to this, I had a conversation with one of our directors of special ed, and really, we need to have a conversation about making sure that we're clarifying definitions, right? Making sure that we're clarifying our policies and procedures across the board, but also annually, we do a training on our practices as well. So again, policy, procedure, and practices.
Could you explain a little bit for the definition of seclusion and of restraint? What's the broad category there of what's happening?
It is, restraint is a physical intervention of some kind. So a student is experiencing a circumstance concerned about where that's going to go in terms of harm to self or others. And so it's some form of physical restraint.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then seclusion would be sent to the office or
Yeah, removal from.
removal from the classroom. So, okay. Because the terms by themselves kind of sound kind of ominous, so a little clarification is always helpful.
I apologize, I'm struggling to read the data. So on the left, it says number of seclusion restraint incidents was 734. And then on the right, we have a total number of 37 students
For all the incidents.
for all the incidents.
So
Each kid is
her
about
eyebrows,
20.
her eyebrows went up as well. So I'm
Okay.
gonna take a look at that
Okay.
data, and we'll take a look at that
Okay.
on Friday. Yeah.
There may be a consistency with reporting too that
Okay.
may be impacting with the data. So the data that came out of the system, there's some
I
questions.
think it's also about the question you asked, right? So we may have asked a question and you may be looking at an entire, right, the whole school, all 23,000 students, and we've just got the wrong definition inserted in there someplace.
Okay.
So we'll have that for you shortly.
Okay. I did it.
Yeah, right?
So with that, I know that we have another meeting coming up shortly, and we appreciate your questions. You're all very good at asking them throughout the presentation, but I just want to make sure that we pause in case there's any final questions or asks, and Superintendent Tully, if there's anything you'd like to say to wrap it up, you're welcome as well.
Well, again, I anticipated lots of questions and
Yes.
discussions, and again, our goal, as you saw, is to actually establish a new set of metrics that we can track over time. And so that's, new ways of looking at things, as Melissa pointed out at the very beginning, and our desire to be able to use quote-unquote street data to inform our work as we go forward is critically important. Also noting the fact that there were a number of requests for additional information that we will work to include in the Friday brief to the board. With that, I appreciate your time. Also recognizing lots of paper, but there's quite a bit, there's some additional slides in the primary slide deck, as well as 2 supplemental decks as well, to support ongoing study of this work. So, thank you.
I'll just say that there's a reason we have this goal, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't all solved, so we appreciate your willingness to show those moments of why we have the goal in the work, because that is a risk, certainly, to share that. Thank you.
I think we also really appreciate the level of detail and study that's going into this. I mean, it's not all pretty. You clearly have a lot of work to do, but the fact that you're presenting it like this and you clearly have even more work that you're doing and more things that you'll be looking into some of them for us, but it's a little bit overwhelming to try to understand all of it, but we really appreciate everything that went into it. We can probably take another couple minutes if people have any leftover questions or comments or.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. You know, looking at all the data, it's really nice that we're taking a moment in time and getting new metrics that we want to move forward with that match the goals of the strategic plan. I guess just a thought is that this was a lot of work to come up with new metrics. I think next year's going to be a lot of work because now when you try and compare last year to the next year and make that fit in a slide and in a chart and get the point across, I think it's going to be challenging. So I think as hard as this year was, next year probably going to be hard too. And then after that, I think it's going to be a lot easier. So I think next year is going to be challenging. And I guess a general thought is as much as we can kind of take this opportunity to baseline and come up with some way of showing data that's consistent or across different metrics, I think that'll help all of us as we try and make sense of data meeting after meeting, year after year. And I know that's hard because we get iReady data, we get SBAC data, and it all looks different. It's all a different graph. But if we can, as a system, have a way of looking at information so that we don't have to relearn the tool every time, it might make it easier to just get right into the reading of the information. I know that's hard.
I think there's a way we can work on that.
For sure.
I just have a quick thought on the data's the data, and I just want to encourage all of you, because you're educators too, right? You're not just, data scientists. I always appreciate when people I know you're in a position, right? Got the boss sitting here too, but of being, I think should be able to feel free to offer, I don't know, your educator lens on it, not just, like for instance, the reading data. I mean, it popped into my head of, well, there's all this improvement in early elementary, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of obvious because they're starting from zero because they can't read, right? So those jumps are going to be huge. Are there social, cultural instances, puberty in middle school that, I mean, I think we should feel free to talk about those things and put things, numbers into context a little bit. Maybe there's, I'm just assuming there's some explanations that are contextual that, we run into issues with kids in middle school because of growth and all this stuff, and so that's a common thing that we see. The numbers might always be different every year, or we can make the numbers better, but just a little, I think we would appreciate it, because sometimes you just sit and look at the data and I'm trying to read between the lines. It's really hard to do as a school board member because we're not formally educated in the theory and the philosophy and the tradition and the history. So it's just something to throw out there. That'd be helpful to us, I think, too.
And we're doing a really good job going around. Also too, what I really appreciate is our ability when we're sitting around this table is to talk about ways of moving the system forward on a long-term basis. We know, because we experienced it ourselves, we have neighbors, we have, all our friends and colleagues and neighbors, in the buildings every day, that students last year had a heavy load emotionally and academically. They did, right? And so we tried to adapt as much as we could. We tried to take what we had before, throw them together sometimes, as we were all getting sick at the same time, right? And so, having our ability to talk about that and, what needs further thinking and pondering, what we think we have a good grasp on, I really appreciate those conversations, because we know we're still in the airplane and it is not completely built. So, really appreciate that.
And I also appreciate the request from board members for, okay, so this is the data, but what are you really doing? What are the strategies to address the concerns that we see within our data? And we did take, as was mentioned earlier, we did take time back in July to take a look at every one of those measures, come up with those metrics that we reported on today, and identify what are the strategies we would think would be implemented to address that particular measure or those metrics within it. And more importantly, how do we track our data over time? You know, what is the leading and lagging indicators associated with that? So we're still building that and implementing that. And, you know, over the next few years, we will be able to track how we're progressing.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, thank you all so very
Thank
much.
you.
And we'll call meeting adjourned. On to the next one.
Yes.
Thank you, Kate. Are we still on? Oh, okay.